Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good day to everybody, members of the class WTO. We are from Group 2, and before we start presentation, let me introduce my team. So I'm Linda, and with us today we have three panelists. So we are doing this in a webinar format. We have Zaki.
Hi.
And Aswad.
Hi.
And Mustafa.
Hi. Assalamualaikum.
So that's three gentlemen, one lady. So today we're going to talk about resource-based view theory, or in short, RBV, and also looking at the perspective of RBV from the eyes of critical management theory, pluralist theories, and ethical theories. We are going to have a very interesting conversation today with these three gentlemen. So I hope you guys are ready. So gentlemen, are you ready?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, let's go. All right. Okay, let's start with panel number one. Aswad, would you explain to the audience what does it mean by resource-based view or RBV?
I'm gonna explain the definition first. So basically, resource-based view is a model that we look into the resources as the key superior firm performance. So and I'm gonna throw you terminology. It is called VRIO attributes. So if the resources of a firm exhibits VRIO attributes, the resource enables the firm to gain and sustain competitive advantage in the long run. So what is VRIO? So VRIO is actually a tool that we use to analyze the firm internal resources. It was developed by Barney J.D. 1991, where he identified 4 attributes that firms' resources must possess in order to become the source of sustained competitive advantage. So basically, the resource must be valuable, rare, imperfectly imitable, and non-substitutable. So it is initially introduced as VRIN and later changed to VRIO by year 1995. So basically, the VRIO analysis stands for 4 questions that ask if a resource is valuable, rare, costly to imitate, and is the firm organized to capture the value of the resources. A resource or capability that meets all 4 requirements can bring sustained competitive advantage for the company.
Thank you for definition of RBV and also touching on VRIO as well. Maybe you can, if you can, explain in more detail about RBV. I'm pretty sure RBV is quite, common, and then we heard of RBV many times. But what is actually RBV? Aswad?
So now I'm going to explain what is resource-based view. So basically, as I mentioned earlier, it is a the company will be looking at the resources. So resources are divided into 2. We'll be looking at the tangible and intangible resources. So these are the 2 proponents that are quite important for this model. So when we talk about tangible resources, we are talking about physical things, land, buildings, machinery, equipment, and capital. All these assets are basically can be bought in, so they confer little advantage to the companies in the long run because rivals can soon acquire the identical assets. So basically, if you have a certain infrastructure or a tangible asset, companies, it's quite easy for other companies in the long run to copy. So then you will lose the competitive advantage to other company. So now, looking at the intangible asset, it is basically everything that has no physical presence but can still be owned by the company. So basically, we're looking at brand reputation, trademarks, intellectual property, IP. These are what we call intangible assets. So unlike physical tangible assets, these resources are built for the long run. The other company, it's quite difficult for other company to 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 acquire, and usually the intangible resources usually stay within a company and are the main source of sustainable competitive advantage. So there are two critical assumptions, which is heterogeneous and immobile. So the first assumption is that skills, capabilities must vary significantly from one organization to other organization. So if the organization would have the same amount and mixed resources, they could not employ different strategies to outcompete each other. What one company would do, the other company would simply follow, and no competitive advantage would be achieved. So then we're looking at immobile. I'm going to give you a bit of example. So the competition between Apple and Samsung Electronics is a good example for the heterogeneous proponents. These two companies operate in the same industry and are exposed to the same external forces, can achieve different organizational performance due to the difference in resources. Apple competes with Samsung in tablets and smartphone markets, where Apple sells its products at much higher prices, and as a result, reaps a higher profit margin as compared to Samsung. So why does Samsung does not follow Apple with the same strategy? Simply because Samsung does not have the same brand reputation or is capable to design user-friendly products like Apple does. So if you look at Apple and Samsung, you notice that Samsung don't have the brand reputation as Apple. That's why Apple can sell higher price. So now we're going to go to the immobile, is the second assumption of RBV model, is the resources are not mobile and do not move from one company to other company. So when I mentioned earlier about Apple and Samsung, we are looking at the intangible resources, which are not easily copied. So same thing with immobile proponents. Due to this immobility, companies cannot replicate rival resources and implement the same strategies. Intangible resources such as brand equity, processes, knowledge, or IP are usually immobile. So basically, once the company arrange the resources in a manner that it can reap the rewards in a form of competitive in a form of sustainable competitive advantage. Yep.
Thank you, Aswat, for the explanation on RBV. So now you know that from the explanation that companies that focus on getting competitive advantage and focus on superior firm performance will opt for resource-based view. Let's discuss a bit on the VRIO analysis. I would like to invite Mustafa to explain about the VRIO analysis in RBV.
Thank you, Paulinda. Although having a heterogeneous and immobile resources is critical in achieving competitive advantage, let me recap. Most of the model back then, especially those in 1990s, most of them talking about how to gain competitive advantage, including those theories come from Michael Porter's. But in this theory, they say that it is not enough if the firm want to sustain it alone by having the resources alone, but they have to do something. There are some questions that they need to answer, like the list that Aswat mentioned earlier, immobile and heterogeneous and tangible and those things. But there are something that what we want from that. So Bani back in 1991 has identified that the purpose of resource base is for to come up with VRIN, which is to understand if the available resources are, the first V is valuable, and the R is rare, I is costly to imitate, and N is to the product must be non-substitutable. So companies' resources and capability must have these four elements in order to have the competitive advantage to compete in industry. However, later on, the framework has evolved where the VRIN has changed to VRIO, where the N has been replaced by O, which the non-substitutable has been replaced to O stand for organization, which organization means that the company must be well organized to exploit these resources. So let's have a look at VRIO. So the first V is a value, question of value, and resources must be valuable, and they must have organization to increase the value offered to customer. This is done by increasing differentiation or decreasing the cost for the production. This is similar to Michael Porter's theory, where you can only gain competitive advantage by being cheap, cost effective, or being differentiated or being unique in offering your product to your client. And this the value cannot be compared with other competitors, right? And this must also lead to very competitive advantage. For example, if we remember Apple back then, they provide a new value to their client where they introduce Siri, which differentiate them from the other competitors. The second question is question of rarity, where the product must be rare enough to exploit competitive advantage, to exploit the resources in order to achieve the competitive advantage. Resources that can only be acquired by one or few companies are considered rare. When more than few companies have this, so this no longer become rare or become a competitive advantage to the company. So one good example, if you remember Astro back then, Astro was the only one paid network television in Malaysia. They use satellite, so it was a competitive advantage to Astro. But nowadays we have a lot of paid network like Netflix and many product coming into the market nowadays. Question number three is a question of imitability, where the company must have value that the other competitor cannot imitate easily. All right. So the resources must also be costly to imitate. For example, I will go with the same example. Astro back then they have a satellite network, and it is not easy for other competitor or newcomer into market to have a satellite network business because it's very costly back then. So it can also consider as imitability because of the cost is very expensive to imitate. And typically in the current world, most of the company they use intellectual property to protect this. Let's say they come up with new idea, new technology, so they protect their idea by having intellectual property legality to protect in order that not to ensure that nobody can imitate the product. And the last question is question of organization. The resources itself do not confer any advantage for a company if it is not organized enough, well organized to capture the value from them. And only the firm that is capable to exploit the valuable, rare, and imitable resources can achieve a sustainable competitive advantage. For example, if I may quote back then prior to COVID-19, we can say AirAsia is one of the company that is well organized, where they use all the internal resources to capture bigger market or to expand to new market and swiftly. Do you remember how they went to Indonesia and captured the market very fast, and they went to in Japan? So they really leverage on the data that they have, and they leverage on the fleets, number of fleets and cheap fleet that they have for them to grow very fast.
Thank you, Mus. That's conclude our part one of our discussion. So we have talked about definition of RBV and also the VRIO analysis tools in RBV. And now we are going to talk about the part two of our discussion, which is we try to look for perspective on RBV from the eyes of critical management theory, ethical theory, and also pluralist theories. I would like to invite Moose again to explain on the first comparison, which is on the critical management theory's perspective on RBV. Moose?
All right, thanks, Puan Linda. First of all, I think it will be fair if I share with you what is critical management theory. Based on Margareta back in 2002, and then Kreitner into 2000, if I'm not mistaken, 2009, they define critical management theory is a management style based on top-down approach, which heavily relies on hierarchies, which mean that they are quite an anti-democracy, where the decision being made by top management, and they just inform the workers to follow the order. They never ask the opinion. So there are 3 points that can be said about RBV according to critical management theory perspective. Uh, Critical management theory concern on the efficiency and effectiveness rather than building competitiveness. Remember that RBV is really much focused on how we can serve to the market, how we can be differentiate from other competitor. But RBV is merely focused on to be critical toward the management, how to become a very efficient and to become effective in terms of managing the company or managing the business. And secondly, critical management more focus on internal matters rather than external shareholder. Remember, RBV, they focus on external shareholder, they focus on customer, how you can leverage on your partners and supply chain. But RBV also really much focus on internal. And thirdly, RBV focus on individual firm as opposed to the industry. Adequate critical management practice important to strategically achieve competitive advantage. So that's what make RBV is quite different than critical management theory. I hope that explained well.
Thank you, Moose. Now let's call the last panel we have. He will explain on ethical theories and pluralist theories perspective on RBV. Zaki?
Thank you, Linda. Basically, ethical theories give advice about how people ought to be and how they ought to behave. That's according to Brady and Hart, 2007. Also, the ethical theory state the condition under which an action is right or moral by Moore, 2007. More often, an ethical theory state that behavior is right if and only if a specific condition occurs and exists. Okay, usually they put the ethical theories into 3 conditions. There is the theological, the second one is the deontological, and then the third one is enthusiasm.
Neurological.
Something like that. Sorry, the pronunciation is not that correct. Okay. Theological states about the where people ought to focus their actions so as to maximize the value or values to be gained as a result of consequences of those actions. Okay, for according to this view, there is nothing intrinsically good or bad about the actions themselves. An action is morally right if doing it would bring about the best possible consequences if everyone performed the action whenever he or she were in that sort of a situation. So morally does not count. Okay, the second area of thought is that the deontological, derived from the Greek word deon, which means duty. Deon talks about the ethical behavior as something that a person has a moral obligation or duty to perform. Okay, this deontologists. Deontologists are completely against outcome-based reasons and can argue that a morally right action can have bad consequences and a morally wrong action can have good consequences. The third kind of ethical ethics is the ethics of conduct area is called intuitionism. Okay, this quoted by Arnold, Oddy, and Zwoleski in 2010. It refers to the ethical standards that are immediately known without any conscious reasoning to determine them. In other words, as educated humans, people simply know how these ethical standards of behavior. Okay, what this says about the RBV is that we can put it into the three points. The first one is that overly exploitation of internal resources, for example, manpower, may lead to ethical concerns because maybe you put that you have to work 9 to 5, but you press the workers that they have to finish their work until maybe 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. at night. So it's unethical because you do not provide any additional monetary benefit. So the second point is that overall branding may mislead and overrate the actual quality of the product or services because you may be outsell for your product, giving the picture that they can provide more. The benefit is more than what is the value they are giving them. So it's not good because the value and the benefit should match. You cannot overly promise to people that your product can do wonders, but in the end, it does not. So the third point is that RV talks about relativism, more pragmatic, theological or constitutional nature. Actually, ethical theorists have tended to reject relativism because it's important to understand why. You first need to ask, what does the argument from the fact of cultural diversity reveal? Because you have. Okay, next, I will talk about the pluralist theory. Okay, basically, pluralist theory talks about recognize the existence within the enterprise of various differences and conflicting interests. Okay, we have a lot of workers, we have a lot of people, we have the management, the top management, and the workers. So everybody can give their opinion on how best to move forward. Okay, at the level of the work organization, this perspective recognizes the existence within the enterprise of various different and needed conflicting interests. However, these differences are not such that they cannot be accommodated. The benefits of collaboration between these fairly evenly balanced interests are such that compromises can be achieved to enable collaborative activity to proceed. So we have to complement each other. So we cannot say that we are only true for the top management, you are wrong for the lower management. So you have to take accounts all the different opinions of the workers and complement each other for the benefit of the company. So the pluralist theory's perspective on RBV is that the first, there are 3 points, I would say. The first one is that multicultural background is the key resources to exploit culture change. Okay, you need multicultural backgrounds to give more colorful to the organization. And then the second point is that inclusive decision making is the key advantage for RBV, which is similar to pluralist management. So it's more inclusive. It's not out exclusive. Okay. RBV advocate pluralism, celebrate diversity to achieve competitive advantage. They welcome everything, the differences between the people, the culture, the diversity. They take it as their strength to move forward. Okay. I have to re-emphasize that even though workers do have a say in everything, the top management still decides what is the best for the company.
Thank you, Zaki, for explanation on perspective of ethical theories and pluralist theories on RBV. So as a conclusion, after 3 comparisons, RBV can be very useful for developing competitive advantage for companies, particularly in short term. But it should be considered in partnership with other frameworks or theories when performing long-term strategic planning. We can see from the perspective of critical management theories, ethical theories, and pluralist theories and RBV, there is positive findings and negative findings of it. But we believe that using RBV is a very good theories to help company achieve their competitive advantage. That's all from us, Group 2. We hope we have presented something that meaningful. And if you have any question, do come and talk to us. Thank you.